Now, how did you end up hooking up with 50 Cent?
Oh, that was basically he's from the neighborhood, so he was basically introduced to me on, in the neighborhood. I was doing what I was doing, and he was doing music.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you became his manager?
Well, I don't know if it's his man. I don't want to say his manager, but I was on the road with him for, after the How to Rob record, and he had another manager by the name of Bernard Alexander, actually, and so we were supposed to be working out something where we would be splitting whatever if I, was on the road with him.
Okay. So did you know him before the How to Rob record?
Yeah, actually, he was brought to my studio by a friend of mine named Doc, actually, and I was told that he was up and coming, he was hot, and he had a record called Ghetto Quran. Actually, I met him around that time.
So 50 comes out with How to Rob.
Mm-hmm.
It ruffled a lot of feathers.
Right.
And you were his kind of co-manager in a way with someone else.
Well, he had the manager. I don't know what title I would get because I basically,
But you were rolling with him.
I was going with him on some of his stuff on the road. So I don't know what position that's supposed to be, or
Sure. Okay.
I don't,
Now you were with 50 in Atlanta when he ran into Ja Rule.
Yeah, I was with 50 in Atlanta when he ran into Ja Rule.
Okay. Now what happened at that point during that night?
Well, the promoter had booked, even though there was, light, beefing going back and forth. I think it was known that, both of those artists, were engaged in, a back and forth situation.
Well, because Chris Gotti told me that, originally they had met in Queens, I guess.
Well, no, that happened after. The meeting in Queens was supposed to take place after that incident.
Well, no. They had met before that.
Oh yeah, they met before that, and it didn't go well or whatever, and then it was moved out.
Okay, right. So
Mm-hmm.
From what Chris Gotti told me, 50 and Ja Rule met. From Chris Gotti's point of view, I guess Ja didn't show 50 as much, attention or something like that.
I think it would happen. From my recollection, one time it was, maybe a video shoot or something, and then but the second time that I remember most vividly.
Hold on, I just want to interrupt you for a second. So after that video shoot situation, I guess 50 had done some mixtapes dissing Ja Rule and Murder Inc.
Yeah, I think something like that. But
okay, and then they met up again in Atlanta.
No, I think before that, it was. I think I did a show at Trafalgar Square, which is Club Amazuru now, and I had DMX. And all the Rough Riders was performing. Actually, everybody came, including Jay-Z. And of course, 50, he's backstage with everybody else. Ja came, they backstage, and I think something happened back then. I think he might have been standing with another individual that, Ja Rule had a problem with before that. And I think that's what escalated it even more when, Ja saw him standing next to the guy and they didn't speak again.
Okay.
So I think that's what perpetuated to another level then. And
something to do with Ja getting his chain stolen or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So then they meet up again in Atlanta.
Well, yeah, they meet up again in Atlanta, but it was already, everybody already knew everybody was coming there, and it was supposed to be a conversation had. They were supposed to talk once we got there, and it was basically me that said to 50 in the lobby just before we walked in the lobby of the hotel. I said, when are you supposed to talk to? Well, what happened when we pulled up? Ja was standing outside the hotel. And he had like this little Louisville Slugger in his hand, a short Louisville Slugger. And he was standing there with a lot of Murder Inc. people and artists and his manager, and so.
And you were cool with all the
Right,
Murder Inc. guys.
yeah, I was cool with everybody. So I was like, so when they said, "Yo, man, what's up with 50?" I said, "Yo," I said, "They supposed to talk. Y'all supposed to talk." You know what I mean? So he said, "All right." So when I went back to 50 and Yayo, I said to 50, I said, "Ain't you supposed to talk to oh boy?" So he said, "Yeah." I said, so he was acting like he didn't really want to do it, And I said, "Well, when are you going to do it?" I said, "You might as well get it over with now." And so, I knew he was a little reluctant about doing it, but he said, "All right," no fear or nothing. I just knew that he wasn't feeling any kind of peace accord, but, he said, "Okay." And when he went to pull Ja to the side, pull him, away from the guys to talk to him, Ja walked over there with the bat in his hand. And, 50, as they talking, how people sometimes talk and they gesture with their hands or whatever. He may have gestured with the bat as he's talking, and, I think, he raised his voice or something, and then 50 swung on him.
Yeah. And then all hell broke loose.
Yeah, kind of like, it just got crazy, and basically, we kind of got it squashed. I mean, 50 ain't get hurt, nobody got hurt. That, it was too many of them really trying to get at him that he didn't get a scratch on him, basically,
Okay. Mm-hmm. Were you still rolling with 50 after that?
Yeah, we went to the show that night. 50 had went to radio with a Columbia rep, and we went to the show that night.
Okay. But then things kept going bad between.
Yeah, we went to the show, but we didn't. The promoter, was, he had heard what happened, and basically he was trying to back down on the second half, and so we like, nah, we ain't, either the second half or it ain't happening. We ain't performing. You know what I mean? So, he was trying to claim that the show was ruined because 50 went to the radio station and basically said that he snuffed Ja. So basically he said that.
Oh, so 50 went to the radio station and talked about what happened.
Right. So when he mentioned what happened, the promoter's trying to say that caused him to lose money on the show. So, but we were there to do the show. But basically when he wasn't trying to come up with that second half, we just took the first half and kept it moving.
Okay.
Yeah, and we went back to New York, and after that it was supposed to be a subsequent meeting.
Between 50 and
50
Murder
and
Inc.
everybody else, Murder Inc., yeah.
Did it happen?
It didn't happen.
Didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a situation at the Hit Factory.
Yeah, that was kind of after,
Okay.
After my time. Me and 50 kind of, went our separate ways or whatever.
Why did you guys go your separate ways?
I basically had something I was doing. I was doing that Black Gangsta album at the time, and I basically, just was into that. I needed to get focused on that, and it was basically, I couldn't run around on the road or whatever. I needed to be where I needed to be. So,
Okay.
And he didn't come to the meeting, so I knew nothing was getting resolved anytime soon. So,
Okay.
Yeah, basically.
And then, the rest is pretty much history.
Yeah, the rest is history.
And then, the altercation happened, the Hit Factory.
Right. Mm-hmm.
The shooting happened.
Right.
With 50, and then, then he came back and
blew up.
Sold millions of records.
10 million records.
10 million records. So dropped a classic first album.
Yeah, first album was a
monster.
Was a monster.
Yeah.
First album was a monster.
Did you maintain any sort of contact with him after that, or that was pretty much it?
Yeah, that was pretty much it. We never basically had any contact.
Did you have a relationship with Supreme?
Yeah, we all came from the same neighborhood, so.
Okay.
Yeah, me and Preem was close.
Yeah.
Yeah, Preem was in the federal system too, when we was, for some of the part of the time that I was there.
Okay.
Plus from the neighborhood,
From your point of view, from what you understand, why was the federal government going so hard at Supreme to the point of even dragging Murder Inc.? Essentially destroying the whole Murder Inc. label that was making hundreds of millions of dollars, trying to tie Murder Inc. into money laundering and everything else like that happened. You know, which they ended up winning, but in the process of them winning,
it still took them a lot of resources to win, and in the music business, when you got a momentum, sometimes if you lose it at a certain point, and depending on why you lose it, you may never gain it back.
Right.
You know, but Preem, you know, I think that the federal government really felt that Supreme just that they didn't get him good enough, you know, in his first case. That's all, and he was just targeted after that. You know, basically that the government, you know, he came up in the crack era years, and you know that name was ringing, along with several other names during that time from Queens, and you know, once the major turning point was once the Eddie Burns situation happened, it kind of put a sour taste in law enforcement's mouth about anybody from that era of time.
What is the Eddie Burns situation?
Eddie Burns, he was the police that was supposedly assassinated in Queens, in Jamaica, South Side.
Okay.
So anybody's name who's were about anything at that time were always going to be a target of law enforcement, and Preem's name was in that mix. So in that era of time.
So essentially,
he pleaded guilty to, and he actually pleaded guilty to his first federal case. So, you know, but they still didn't feel that they gave him enough time, actually, you know.
And
again, not that he had anything to do with the Eddie Burns situation, but it's
so
just,
he was never convicted for the Eddie Burns.
No, he didn't have anything. You know, his name never was even involved. It's just his name was big in that era of time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in the process, Murder Inc. got dragged into this whole
right. Well, you know, the only thing that you know Preem had told me when he first brought Irv in the area where I was at, and I first met Irv, was that he thought Irv was a DJ or something at the time, but he felt that he was going to be big in the music business, and that's what he told me. I mean, I didn't understand what he was really saying or seeing at the time, but he had his own vision of what Irv could become, and he said that. So, you know, Preem actually had a lot of love for Irv in terms of and belief in his ability to do whatever he was doing, you know, which had nothing to do with anything illegal.
Mm-hmm. You know, so. And Irv went on to do massive things.
To do big things, you know.
But I wish he'd stop.
I like Meek Mill, man. Like I'm not gonna.
I wish he'd stop. Listen, I liked Meek Mill, but all of this shit is making you look bad, homie.
Saying he used to want to be signed to Rockefeller, but then he turned into Jay.
Oh yeah.
I understand what he's saying, but you got to understand how that could be took.
Yeah, you're taking a shot at Jay-Z.
I mean, you could be taking a light shot at Jay.
You're taking a shot at Jay-Z.
And hip hop be like, nah, bro, you ain't Jay.
Yeah.
You're Drake, which is fine.